Once you can move, sign this paper quickly. All right. Lying in a hospital bed, connected to medical equipment, my wife handed me a divorce paper. I never want to see her face again. How cold-hearted can people be? What were those 3 years of marriage about? I watched in shock as my wife walked out of the room. When I woke up, I saw an unfamiliar ceiling. It wasn't the ceiling of our bedroom at home, nor the break room at my usual office. The beeping of an unfamiliar machine was steady. I tried to speak, but no voice came out. What happened to me? The moment I remembered, I let out a scream. It was the terror of that moment. "Robert, you're awake. Robert." I heard my mother's voice close by. She hastily pressed the nurse's call button, telling the nurse I had regained consciousness. Tears streamed down my mom's face as she kept saying, "Thank God." Still dazed, I tried to recall that day. My name is Robert Johnson, and I turned 32 this year. I've been married to Catherine for 3 years. That day was our wedding anniversary. Catherine and I, on her request, had taken a long trip after a long time. On the way back, on the freeway, I was the one driving. I always drive safely and was doing so that day. The nightmare began just after leaving a rest area. I heard the sound of sudden braking, and then a truck came hurtling towards us with tremendous force. It also dragged the 2 cars nearby with it. I tried to swerve, but everything happened too quickly. We were involved in a major freeway pileup. My memories stopped there. I don't even know how many days have passed since. A doctor, presumably the one in charge of me, appeared and began to ask me a few questions. As we spoke, I fully regained consciousness. I learned from the doctor that I had been unconscious for 2 weeks. I also found out that the drivers of the other 2 cars involved had passed away. I'm grateful to be alive. While listening to the doctor, I searched the room for Catherine. If Catherine was with me during the accident, she must be injured too, maybe even more seriously than me. "Mom, where's Catherine?" My voice was raspy, but my mom said, "She's okay." Apparently, her injuries were less severe than mine, and she could even walk. She was undergoing some tests and couldn't come to see me. She promised she'd let Catherine know I was awake. Relieved by my mom's words, I suddenly felt pain everywhere. It's a sign that my body was trying to heal. I was told that I'd need to stay in the hospital for treatment and rehab for about a month and a half, and I felt guilty about my colleagues at work. However, both Catherine and I are alive. I decided to think of that as a blessing. Even days after I regained consciousness, Catherine never visited me in the room. I still can't walk on my own, and can't make it to Catherine's hospital room by myself. Once, while I was asleep, she must have visited me, leaving a note that read, "Get well soon." I wish she had woken me up, but I appreciated her kindness and not wanting to disturb me. I've got to get better soon, so the 2 of us can go home. Every day, that's all I could think about. I worked so hard that I even wanted to pat myself on the back, and I recovered faster than the doctors had expected. Just when I thought I might finally be able to walk by myself, Catherine suddenly appeared in my room. I knew she was in the same hospital, but we never crossed paths, not even in physical therapy. I was slightly worried that she was deliberately avoiding me by scheduling her therapy sessions at different times. I'd heard that Catherine's injuries were minor compared to mine, but she looked pitiful, her arm in a cast. "I want us to get divorced soon. It's a hassle having to deal with this accident," she said. She handed me a document. It was a divorce paper, just like the ones I had seen on TV shows. Catherine's name was already signed. Catherine, who I had not seen in a while, looked like a stranger. "What do you mean? Divorce?" Trying to sort out the situation in my confused mind was making my head hurt. I couldn't believe it, and I held my head in my hands. She left the divorce paper on the table and walked out, her heels clicking on the floor. "Once you can move, submit it right away," she said in a voice so cold it was unlike anything I had heard from her before. She left those words behind and walked out of the room. I just sat there in shock, unable to say a word. The divorce paper rustled on the table. The events of just moments ago were not a dream. It was a discomforting noise that drove the reality of it home. The sudden divorce paper, it was more than I could handle. I discussed this with my mom, who had come to visit me. I thought she would surely be on my side, but she began saying that if it had come to this, I should get a divorce. Catherine and my mom had a relationship like close friends. If the subject of divorce had ever come up, I thought she would certainly have stopped it. So I was surprised. She even said that she didn't want me clinging to the other party even after they had handed me the divorce paper. Perhaps my mom felt that her son was being neglected. It meant that I had no allies in this matter, and able to move freely. All I could do was despair. Catherine never appeared before me again, proving that this was no bad dream. Thank you for everything. When I was discharged, the physiotherapists, nurses, and doctors who had been in charge of me all came out to see me off. I was handed a bouquet of flowers at the entrance and felt like crying. I have been a mess since Catherine left me. I hated everything, even the physical therapy. Everyone stuck with me through thick and thin, putting up with me, and I felt humbled. It seemed everyone knew why I was in such a state. Especially during the therapy sessions, I was a real nuisance. Every day they persuaded me, who had started to say that I didn't want to do the therapy, when I was being stubborn, saying that I didn't need to do the treatment. A young nurse scolded me harshly. I feel lucky that I was brought to this hospital. I started to drag my leg a bit, but that's no big deal. A new life is waiting for me. I stepped out firmly, leaving the hospital behind me. Coming home after so long, it was eerily quiet. Catherine's belongings were moved out. Yet the tidiness was evidence she had cleaned up before leaving. I still had the divorce paper, and able to submit it. I thought about throwing it away, but I didn't have the guts. I didn't want Catherine to dislike me for disposing of the divorce papers. Still hung up on her, I guess. My co-workers were eagerly awaiting my return from the hospital. I became a burden because of my prolonged hospital stay. I started working hard, trying to accept my new life without Catherine. While at work, I could forget her absence. Working until I was exhausted, I only went home to sleep. On my days off, I aimlessly wandered to places we used to visit together. In the midst of this routine, I got a call from a lawyer claiming to be Catherine's representative lawyer. They wanted me to submit the divorce paper as soon as possible. I invited them to my house to discuss it. Apparently, Catherine wanted the divorce finalized quickly, maybe to be prepared for when she left. She had given the lawyer 3 copies of the divorce papers written in her own hand. Seeing those divorce papers, I made up my mind to submit them. I didn't want to do anything that Catherine would dislike. She wanted it so badly, I told myself, and forced myself to accept and submit it. With that, Catherine and I officially became strangers again. Even though we were officially divorced, there was no significant change in my life. I worked, slept, and on my days off, retraced my memories with Catherine. Friends and colleagues suggested I should remarry, but I couldn't think of such a thing yet. I was introduced to some people at social drinking events, but my heart wasn't moved at all. Then, a huge shock hit my daily life. On a Sunday when I was supposed to work but it was cancelled, I was retracing my memories with Catherine as usual. Cherry blossom season. The cherry blossoms at the park we used to visit for our annual picnic were in full bloom. Several groups were enjoying the cherry blossoms. I sat on a bench on the edge of the park and took out a can of beer. We visited this park several times until the cherry blossoms had all fallen. With a beer in hand, I gazed at the cherry blossoms. Nothing had changed from the previous year. It seemed like I was the only thing that had changed. I took a sip of beer and sighed. That's when I noticed. On a bench diagonally opposite me, across the cherry tree, there was Catherine, looking up at the cherry tree. Her very short hair had grown longer. She looked a bit thinner, but there was no way I could mistake her for someone else. As I sat there in shock, unable to speak, Catherine noticed me. Our eyes met slowly. Her slightly pale eyes, which I remembered well, caught mine. Just as I was about to call out Catherine, she gave me a slight nod. I froze at her formal gesture. It was a clear rejection of me. I was at a loss for what to do. Without any sign of surprise, Catherine bowed her head to me once again. "Catherine, let's head home." A strange man's voice made me startle. Looking in the direction of the voice, I saw a man I didn't recognize. He was in a basketball uniform, with a ball in his hand. He's the guy who was practicing under the hoop just a moment ago. Catherine, when called by her name, opens a white book on her knee. The cover is blank too, so it might be a diary. When she looked up after confirming something, she smiled at the young man. "John, let's go home." Catherine swiftly intertwined her arm with the young man's. John, as he was called, was gently pushing Catherine away, saying, "Annoying." Catherine laughed off being shunned. It was like when we were dating, and I'm left in a daze. Was he the reason for our divorce? Did we divorce using an accident as an excuse? I silently watched the two leaving the park. I couldn't possibly chase them and question them. Since the day I saw Catherine at the park, I couldn't concentrate on work. I thought she probably never wants to see me again. Still, I couldn't give up, and I went to that park on my next day off. At the entrance of the park, I spotted Catherine immediately. This time, I quietly sat on a bench that was a little closer. Catherine was writing something in the white book on her knee. It seemed to be a notebook, not a book. It's thick and looks like a diary. She didn't seem to notice me sitting there. There was no sign of her being flustered. Occasionally, she would look up from the notebook to gaze at the cherry blossom. I sneakily stole glances at her profile. I must have been doing that for about 30 minutes. I mustered up courage to call out to her. "Catherine, long time no see." And my words, Catherine, with a startled look, raises her face. She was surprised, but it wasn't just surprise on her face. For some reason, she looked extremely frightened. I couldn't find the words. In that moment of silence, Catherine quickly stood up from the bench. The white notebook on her knee slipped onto the ground. Catherine was backing away from me. By the time I slowly bent down to pick up the notebook, Catherine was no longer in sight. I could see Catherine running around the corner out of the park. She's avoiding me to the point of running away. Feeling completely desolate, I collapsed onto the bench. I felt as though all strength had left my legs. It was like all the energy to live was drained out of me. Only the white notebook that Catherine had been holding was left in my hands. I have to return it if it's important. I casually opened the notebook. Of course, I also had an ulterior motive to find some clue about Catherine's current situation. The notebook, thick as a diary, was densely filled with writing. There it was, the familiar handwriting of Catherine. Yet, its content was unbelievable. As I read on, my fingers trembled with every page turned. What was written was a daily log. It all started from that accident day. On the last page, it read, "The cherry blossoms are beautiful today." Everyday activities were detailed: the time she woke up, who she met, what she ate. She wrote about interesting things she saw on TV. Characteristics and names of people were thoroughly recorded. The content was too procedural to be called a diary. There was no other way to do it. Thinking of Catherine's feelings brought tears to my eyes. On the first page of the notebook, Catherine, waking from the accident, received a doctor's diagnosis. Initially, it seemed she had lost memory of the accident. Memory confusion after a significant accident isn't that uncommon. It would be temporary, the doctor said, but Catherine realized something after that. Her memory was starting to fade more frequently. She consulted the doctor and underwent detailed examinations. There were abnormalities found in the right temporal lobe and the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory. This was the cause of the memory disorder. Catherine was aware that her memory was slowly but surely fading. Deciding to divorce while she could still remember me, to not trouble me, to not let me see her forget me. Her unwillingness to hurt me was put into words. Her sudden divorce paper was a form of kindness from her. The next day, I took a day off work and sat on a bench in that park, the Central Park. I have to return this notebook to Catherine. I was certain that Catherine would show up. However, who appeared was a young man who seemed close to Catherine. Spotting me, he walked straight toward me. Looking at the approaching man, he didn't seem older than a college student, tall but still growing into his limbs. "That's Catherine's notebook, isn't it? Thank you for bringing it." The young man said so, bowing his head. Finally, I understood who he was. He had grown up so much in the short time I hadn't seen him. "You're Catherine's nephew, John, right?" Upon my words, he nodded. He seemed to have realized that I was Catherine's ex-husband. As I handed over the notebook, he received it with both hands. I want to start over with Catherine. Can you arrange a meeting for me? At my words, he furrowed his eyebrows. The look on his face was that of someone who just got roped into a complicated situation. That's impossible. Starting over. After such a preface, he told me about Catherine's current condition. Catherine's memory disorder had progressed, and now she can only retain her memory for about 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, she would forget everything. But still, I believe I can start over. In a half-yelling tone, I said something that made John give in. I'd like to think it was my persistence that paid off. He asked me to wait a moment, then went to call Catherine. I feared I might be left hanging just like that. But still, I intended to wait until Catherine showed up. About 20 minutes later, Catherine and John appeared in the park. Upon seeing me, Catherine gave a little smile. It wasn't a friendly smile, but a forced one. "Thank you for picking up my notebook," she said. She seemed to have no memory of our previous encounter. She bowed her head as if meeting me for the first time. When I introduced myself, Catherine carefully wrote my name in her notebook so she wouldn't forget it. She repeated my name over and over under her breath. Then, slowly, Catherine's finger traced back through the pages. For a moment, her finger stopped, and she let out a soft sigh. "So you are my husband," she muttered. Those words made my heart jump. My name still existed in a corner of Catherine's memory. "Catherine, let's start over. It'll be all right," I said, looking straight into Catherine's eyes. I've never been so serious in delivering my words. Catherine's gaze fixed on me. There was no sign of confusion in her eyes. "We can't," Catherine muttered softly. "In 30 minutes, you'll be a stranger to me. Please don't disregard my decision from half a year ago." She blurted all at once. It might sound presumptuous, but I had believed Catherine would accept me. I felt as though a bucket of cold water had been dumped on my head. Speechless, I stood still as Catherine began to tear pages out of her notebook. Once she finished tearing out most of the front half, she held it out to me. When I didn't take it, she pressed it against my chest. "This is the end," Catherine said, turning her back to me. All I could do was watch her walk away. The pages of the notebook Catherine gave me were filled with memories of us. How we met, started dating, and got married. Even she wrote the things she likes and dislikes about me. The last page expressed Catherine's anguished decision to leave me. I trampled on those feelings. Regret washed over me, but it was too late. There was only one path left for me. From then on, I became a friend of Catherine's. Whenever we crossed paths, I'd say hello and make small talk. Catherine, after a few times, revealed her memory disorder to me. In Catherine's world, after tearing out those front pages, I no longer existed as her husband. Everything would start from scratch. There's a chance Catherine might fall in love with me again someday. I intend to wait until that moment comes. If such a miraculous moment ever arrives, I think I'll believe in the existence of God.